Hiring processes are something that, we all do, but particularly in schools, there are usually a lot of opinions about what's happening, especially when key people leave. And it needs to be clear who's making the ultimate decision. If you have a search committee, are they making the decision or is it the head of school? Is it the board? Do you have similar processes for discipline, handling parent issues? That this predictability is something that people will learn to trust. And so there will always be hard situations. But if people feel that this is a transparent process that's predictable, they won't feel suspicious.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm excited to have Amanda Riegel on the podcast to discuss why transparency is essential for great leadership. Amanda is the founder and CEO of Excelle, a company dedicated to advancing women's leadership excellence through mentorship, professional development, and innovative strategies. With years of experience guiding executives and organizations toward success, Amanda understands firsthand how transparency builds trust, enhances decision making, and strengthens teams. Transparency is often discussed as a leadership buzzword, but what does it really mean in practice? And how can leaders cultivate transparency in a way that strengthens rather than undermines their teams? Stick around as we explore these questions and more with Amanda Riegel. Amanda, welcome to the Science of Leadership.
Thank you, Tom. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's great to see you. It's been a while since we got to work together at Brown in our coaching training and so forth, but delighted
Yes.
to have you on. Been
Thank you
looking
for
forward to
having me.
this. Before we dive into today's topic of transparency, I was just wondering, you're in this space and you're working on leadership development, especially among women who are in roles in various organizations, but how did you get into doing this? How did you get into the field of leadership?
I appreciate the question. So you and I met in a coaching training, but I was sort of midway into starting Excelle at that point. So Excelle is a women's leadership organization that I founded. We will celebrate our fifth anniversary this year. But the quick backstory is I was working in education for probably 20 years. And then I was doing search work. So I was recruiting heads of school and other administrators. And I felt that there was something missing for women, particularly when we got to the end stage of the finalists. And that I really enjoyed that creative process of helping them be their best. And I had a parallel experience where I was on the board at a school where we were onboarding a new head of school. And so I was on the other side of the desk and really charged with managing her transition. And so I became laser focused in how to empower this woman who was a woman of color. She was an introvert and she was replacing a man who had been at the school for about 25 years. The school was so excited to have her, but probably through no fault of their own would be making comparisons. And so I just got really excited about how do we empower schools and women to think about how to receive them in a way that makes them feel empowered. So Excelle for me is a place that is a women's leadership group. So we have cohorts of sitting heads of school from all over the United States, and we have cohorts of aspiring women. And so some of them want to be heads, some of them are on the leadership team and very happy in those roles. Sometimes we meet in person, sometimes, a lot of times we meet virtually. But I would say the women are feeling that, our secret sauce is how we gather. And I love that you asked me to talk about transparency because transparency, trust, confidentiality, those are some of the hallmarks of, being in Excel.
Mhm.
And when you climb the ladder, when you get to that highest rung, there aren't a lot of people that you can say, I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing on this tack.
Sure, yeah.
And Excel is a place where other women know exactly how you feel. They can say, my board chair is driving me nuts today. And you have no fear of repercussion. And so, really, it's a place where we thrive in transparency and being honest because we boost each other up. And it's a place that they can feel safe to make mistakes.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. That really provides more context for us as we move forward in our discussion on transparency. And so, with that in mind, I always like to kick off with defining our terms, if you will. And so, from your standpoint, again, transparency is it's sort of like authenticity, right? It gets thrown around a lot today in leadership discussions, but what does transparency really mean for a leader from your perspective?
I appreciate that. So I was talking about transparency within Excel and in our network, but most often when I'm coaching women one on one or we're talking in groups, we are talking about transparency at school levels, independent schools. So, anywhere from like nursery to grade 12. And the most important relationship in those schools is between the board chair and the head of school. And there should be, no light in between the two of them, that they are in lockstep. And that's really essential. So when I think about transparency in my professional world, um, I'm thinking about that relationship. And so we're often talking about, how to foster that relationship. You can't just start right off the bat knowing how to dance with this person.
Mhm.
And so I love the term what you feed grows. And I feel like, the board is technically responsible for hiring and firing the head of school, but they need to be very invested in, how that head comes to the school and how they learn the community and the culture. I really feel like the board needs to understand what keeps the head up at night, and especially the board chair needs to be honest about what he or she is worried about. And that formidable pair is what really leads to success in schools.
What I'm hearing as I'm listening is relationship. It's about, I guess, on some level, vulnerability, right? I mean, it's being willing to say, just as you said earlier, these people are driving me crazy. You wouldn't say that to your board, but being able to be vulnerable with others to say, here's where I am on this, because you said the thing that keeps the person up at night, and they need to know that, right? The board needs to know that, and so this idea that people that we're working with need to know where we are with the things that we're wrestling with, that we're concerned about. It's not all magic, and we don't have all the answers all the time, maybe.
Definitely, and the board is a great example of that because it's a collection of individuals who have a different, set of expertise, and so, those can be wise counsel, those individuals for a head of school. A head of school is a specialist in education and management. They may not be a specialist in finance or in
Mhm,
strategic planning, and so, a really healthy board is one in which the head can say, "Can I have, a task force that's really gonna help me understand as we are doing this ambitious capital campaign, do we have the land to do this? Do we have the donor base that can sustain an ambitious
mhm,
campaign? There are so many details that, a generalist versus a specialist, a head of school cannot afford to be a specialist in just one of those things. They have so many things that will come at them in the course of a day. They have to
yeah,
understand how to delegate
mhm,
and really be a skilled generalist, I think.
yeah. Yeah, and you hit on something there that I think is so important is this idea of having a board. In a sense, anybody that's a leader needs to have a collection of people that they can go to and say, "Hey, I'm not sure what the right answer is. Can you give me counsel on this?" And so I think that's a side note apart from our transparency, but that's a really important thing too. A minute ago, I mentioned the word authenticity, and that's another buzzword that's out there right now. And I was just wondering, do you see those as synonyms? If you don't, why? If you do, why? I mean, but anyway,
I
authenticity and transparency?
I really appreciate the distinction because I think this happens a lot in our conversations at Excel that women have ascended to a certain level and they might be doing fine in their job, but they might be noticing sort of a different values alignment. So I would say authenticity is when you are leading from a place that you feel your personal goals
Mm,
and what you feel is in alignment with how you want to show up in the world is a match for the environment and the community where that person is leading. And hopefully, you're in a situation that you feel you can lead with your authentic self. I think what happens oftentimes is heads are nervous to be vulnerable and be fully transparent because they are worried that it will be used against them. And sometimes, the more transparent they are, they realize, oh no, this is not a values alignment anymore. And so, transparency is essential, but it can also lead to this um, sort of not crisis, but subtle hints that you may not be leading authentically. And so
yeah.
that I'm proud that Excel is a place where women have actually decided, I think I'm ready to go, or I think I'm ready to start my own business. I always say it's less important to me where the woman is working and more, what she's bringing to our conversations.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's great, the way you frame that distinction between authenticity being this idea of real. This is who you really are, and it's aligned with what you're doing. When we talk about authenticating, whether it's a Picasso or something of that nature, like this is a real thing. It's not disguised. It's not something else in disguise or what have you. Versus transparent, we think of see-through, right? Like, okay, I'm not shrouding anything here, right? And so I think that's really, really great. As you think back on your career, do you have a story that kind of demonstrates what transparency really looks like in a leader?
I can. So very often heads of school inherit situations. In a perfect world, they would have, a fantastic leadership team. There would be no one that they needed to clean house. The budget would be balanced. Those things don't happen all the time. I am thinking of a situation where a head of school knew that there was a deficit budget, and but you can imagine coming in and needing to freeze salaries would be a really difficult sort of first year proposition. But I was really impressed with this head of school who from day one, built trust with the community and didn't just sort of give the highlight, we're in financial trouble, but really opened the curtain and said, let me walk you through our school's budget and how we, get to a balanced budget. And so I think there can be assumptions that people just understand, hey, kids pay tuition, it all sort of comes out in the wash, we get paid as faculty members, and they don't always understand, the big picture. And so in this case, the head of school had to freeze salaries in the first year and had to boost enrollment in subsequent years. But I believe that because this head had done a wonderful job being transparent about the process and how the business of schools work generally, as well as, okay, and these are the issues we're dealing with at our school, the faculty could swallow that hard pill in the first, couple of years. And the another thing I'll add is, admissions, sales and other businesses, but, having students come into the building can be an interruption if you're teaching and you have, people coming through. But if your teachers understand that enrollment is a big driver of their salaries, of the success of the school, they will be a part of the ambassador, team
Mhm.
in stopping, describing what they're doing with their students. So you just see so many benefits to being transparent about, what you're inheriting and where you want to go.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It reminds me of multiple experiences in my own career, but certainly a time when I was leading this program and things were going great guns. When you're being highly successful in something, there becomes this expectation. Maybe it's expectation that I've imposed on myself, but expectation that exists, right? And that we have to keep advancing and improving and growing. There's this pressure that comes with that, right? And and then as an organization is growing, whatever you're doing, when you're successful, it tends to grow.
Hmm.
And that just becomes more responsibilities and more things that you're taking on. And this gets to delegation, this point I'm making, but too, but it's really about transparency, thinking on some level that nobody else knows that you're in the situation, right? Like the people that you're leading, somehow they see you as superhuman. And I remember being working with my team and getting to a place with one of them, I felt like I couldn't keep up, and I finally had to admit that. And it was a moment where it was like, "Well, it's about time you've come to that realization, now we can help you," right? And so then suddenly, there's this relief, and you can start delegating because I thought that they thought I had it completely together, right? But they could look and see that you're struggling, but then they don't wanna kind of impose on you or inflict some
Yeah.
kind of psychological injury when they say, "Hey, we see that you're struggling here," right? So maybe there's some distance there, and then that transparency, that moment of being forced to admit, I'm struggling here with this and need some help. Well, it's about time, that you, and then suddenly, boom, the whole thing, everybody comes together and so on. And that was early in my career when that happened, but that transparency and just now I tend to be extraordinarily transparent with those sorts of things. There are other things that I'm still learning about and growing in, but that certainly, and that's also helped me tremendously with delegation because when you're transparent and people see that you where you are and what you're trying to do and the fact that you do need help, delegation isn't you dumping on them. It's them actually being able to help in this mission. So I find that from my own personal experience, having screwed it up, in the past, that really is beneficial.
I love that story, and it reminds me, I mean, I think we're both high achievers, but it is the moment where you sort of let the pressure out. I will share, I think that's what Excel women have said is one of my greatest strengths is that I am not afraid to laugh at myself. I'm not afraid to lead with vulnerability. And then people will say, "Oh, okay, that's what we're all about. Wow, she just shared that thing. She went there. Okay, I guess we're going there."
Yeah,
So often I'm doing that, but I will say that I was just diagnosed with ADHD 5 years ago, and it coincided directly with starting Excel. And my dad still doesn't believe it. He's like, "You did all of these things," and I said, "But I was, that duck, calm on top, but swimming underneath." And it was the most empowering thing about leadership is to realize I have issues with short-term memory. Go figure. There is a reason why I need to be reminded about things or it needs, organizationally. And so being able on our small team to be open about that was a game changer and realize
yeah,
I can hire for that or we can, figure it out on our team. And that the release of realizing you don't have to be good at everything and you're going to have a much stronger product actually if you do,
Yeah.
those specialists. You could not have told me that in my 20s or 30s. It was not until all of Excel was there and I had to sort of blue sky dream. I was really good at being on a team and tackling a to-do list, but
Mhm.
having a blank slate. And I said to the doctor, "How in the world did this happen until now?" And she said, "You just get very good at compensating. And then at some point in people's lives, it doesn't work."
Yeah.
So I'm seeing that with my kids too. My daughter at junior year was just diagnosed with dyslexia, and we're all scratching our heads. But, the doctor's saying, well, she is really bright and she has learned how to accommodate. Her grades are so much better now because there's this transparency. This is how
Yeah.
you learn. So
Mhm.
it's been such a learning experience for us, and it's helped us be incredibly empathetic, but also, advance further than we thought.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so much to this idea. It brings the team together, I think, when we're transparent. Vulnerable is a word you use. That reminds me of a book that I read a long time ago called "Leading with a Limp" by Dan Allender. Really good book, and it really is about that. It's about being able to say to people, "Hey, look, I'm weak in this area. I need some help here," and that's transparency and this vulnerability. And what we're talking about here really is supported by scientific research.
Definitely.
um, you may be familiar with Amy Edmondson. She's actually on faculty at Harvard, and so she's done a bunch of studies with regards to psychological safety,
Hmm.
and found that when the culture is such that we're open, we're transparent, really helps the functioning of the teams. It boosts trust, collaboration, innovation. It's where there's transparency that is a core value. Again, performance tends to be better. You have lower turnover rates. There's just so much about the idea of transparency that's important. And similarly, Jim Kouzes, who we had on the show not long ago, and Barry Posner highlight in their work that transparent leaders gain credibility and are more likely to inspire commitment from their teams. So I think that there's so much in the world of the scientific side of things that shows that the transparency really is a game changer.
Definitely. It makes me think about when a head of school is feeling that they are leading with authenticity and transparency, that they are in a stage where, I think of athletics. I played college sports, and I just think when I was in the zone and feeling confident, I could take risks. I could sort of play out of my mind. And when you're in a defensive stance, when you're not feeling like
Mm,
you can be your full self, I think about it from a leadership perspective. You are cautious, you're worried about making mistakes, you're thinking about the potential risks. That's not leading from a feeling of abundance. And
mhm,
feeling, abundant, I don't think necessarily has to mean that are hitting all your numbers. If you have the trust of the board and you feel that they endorse the things that you're good at, they're going to help you find the things that you're not good at, you can take risks because you can say, well, we tried this and I needed help in this area, and the board can see that. I just think it allows leaders to be so much more productive and be aspirational in their goals.
I agree with that. This idea of transparency, again, fostering the psychological safety that kind of hit on a minute ago, and some other work that's been done. Google did this study called the Aristotle Project a few years ago, and they were looking at high performing teams, and they found that the most successful ones were those where the leaders fostered kind of open dialogue, transparent dialogue with each other, encouraged people to give feedback, and that made their decision processes even better when they did that. And so there's a component of this of creating again psychological safety, but it's also creating a sense of open communication and a place where people feel like, okay, if the leader is able to admit, I've got this issue that I'm dealing with here, I'm not as necessarily as great in this particular area, or I need help there, then those that we lead will follow suit, right? And so instead of them pretending like they've got it together and screwing something up down the road, right? That then really causes a lot of problems. Then they can say, "I need more help in this area," and then everybody can really function more effectively because just like playing sports, you have people who are in different roles, and you have different roles for a reason because one person's really good at defense, one person's good at offense, one's good at passing, one's good at playing the entire field, whatever it may be. But that takes everybody recognizing each other's strengths and areas where they're not as strong, and then them playing to their strengths, just like you're saying, you
Yep,
know, um, you're in the zone. You don't have to use a bunch of mental energy to keep up a facade.
for sure. And I think about teamwork, and I think about where I see parallels in the school world. Again, that's my specialty. And the leaders who people rave about, independent school world is small, but the ones that they say, "Oh, I'd love to work for that person," I think that they have practices. I don't think they're just nice people. They dedicate themselves to getting to know their teams. And so it's not just let's talk about work and what are your goals, but they have regular communication one on one. They make time. They're curious about that person and beyond the school world. What keeps them up at night? What are things they enjoy? And so those are connections that are important to make. But I think just in the way they're communicating, that there's some key practices. I think predictability is really important. Do you have a regular meeting every week, every other week? Hiring processes are something that we all do, but particularly in schools, there are usually a lot of opinions about what's happening, especially when key people leave. And it needs to be clear who's making the ultimate decision. If you have a search committee, are they making the decision, or is it the head of school? Is it the board? Do you have similar processes for discipline, handling parent issues? That this predictability is something that people will learn to trust. And so there will always be hard situations, but if people feel that this is, a transparent process that's predictable, they won't feel suspicious. And they may not like
Hmm.
the outcome, but they'll feel like the process was fair. Um,
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is really important is just being visible, taking the time to get out of the office, even though there are a million emails and things to do, but just having FaceTime with teachers, with students, with parents, with your customers, and just showing that you are curious and you're understanding, what they're doing. And the last thing I think is showing investment in growth. So very often you can be really just focused on like what's the day to day, and I love when leaders take a little bit of time from those weekly meetings to say, where do you want to go? How can I foster that within the school?
Yeah.
And when it's time to leave, I want to help you find that next job. So many people are afraid to communicate with their head of school that I might want to leave. And really, a thoughtful head has created the room so that it's not a surprise.
Yeah.
Um, it gives you more room to retain the person because maybe you'll be able to challenge them in those ways and come up with roles within your school. But beyond that, when they really have outgrown your school, hopefully you've maxed out that individual and
Hmm.
that they're really ready to go and you're happy about that.
Yeah.
That kind of reputation will last a career.
You're just describing fostering transparency among the people that we're leading, and how that opens up opportunities to grow them and help them grow in their careers. I think that's brilliant. As you think about transparency for leaders, what are the areas that you think people leaders have the biggest challenge when it comes to trying to be transparent?
Well, so Excel is a place that I'm really proud has more women of color than white women, and we're always looking for different aspects of identity that may not be an area that women are feeling confident to express, especially as a head of school. And so I ask women, why is Excel different? And they say, well, this is really a space that we don't have a fear. When we only have one strike as a woman or a woman of color, that if we admit we don't know something, that there will be any consequence. That as we've talked about, being honest leads to greater growth. And so
Mhm.
I think a fear of transparency is not knowing the culture of a school community, to
Yeah.
know what aspects of my identity are safe. And so I think that's a reality that we face. I think women, especially women who are parents and are navigating that impossible, there is no balance in that situation, but especially with young children. When you have a moment that you are pulled as a mother, do you want to say that to your board? Or do you want to make accommodations? I mean, there's a moment where authenticity is challenged. You
Mhm.
know, depending on how the woman has prioritized um, you know, work and parenthood, which on any given day will be a sliding scale, that can be a real vulnerability to know how transparent you can be about where you're pulled. Do you say you just couldn't be there for X reason, or are you honest with your board about whatever the reasons are? I think that women wear so many hats that I think we really have a fear of being honest about when we're pulled in different directions.
Yeah. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Keeping away from transparency is ultimately it's a fear issue that
Mhm.
we don't know what. It's sort of like when people are inauthentic, to some degree. We're afraid of how people are going to respond to our true selves. Transparency, we're afraid that we don't know what the outcome is going to be if we are transparent. We're afraid that the worst will happen. Isn't that what we do in so many domains in life? We build up these, as humans, if we don't have data we assume the worst,
Mhm.
you know?
Yes.
I mean, that's especially the case, I think, with younger generations now. I mean, maybe even our generation too, but when it comes to texting and things, like, they expect an immediate response, and if you don't respond immediately, it doesn't matter if I'm resuscitating a child who's dying. If I don't respond to this, emoji or whatever, then I must be upset or I must be mad or I'm whatever these things are, right? And so so I think we do the same thing when it comes to things like transparency, is that we say, "Well, if I do that, then these bad things will happen." Maybe that is based on prior experience or data, but it seems like everybody does that.
Mhm.
And so I think you're right. I think that it's the fear of how would people respond. And I have found, unless you're dealing with some sociopaths or things of that nature, most of the time people respond very well to honesty, which is what we're talking about, right? I mean, in a sense, it's
Yes.
it's being honest about where you are with things and what you can and can't do. And so I think most of the time people say, "Whoa, that's refreshing."
Mhm. Definitely. And there are situations in which I think women have found that, they were hired to do a job and perhaps the board overestimated the community's capacity for change. And so sometimes just being hired as a woman is an aspect that, communities will say, "Oh my gosh, that was, she's just bringing all this change." And it might have been change that everyone wanted, but because she doesn't look like the predecessor, that's change that people are uncomfortable with. And so and it's not exclusive to women, but I think women have gotten particularly good at trying to figure out, because they've been burned, uh,
Mhm.
is this a safe community for that, for me to show these aspects? Um, we talk a lot about the aspects of their presentation and their professional persona that we are judged for. We do professional headshots. Not everyone loves getting their picture taken, but I'm saying we are all judged by what we're wearing, what we look like as women. We can't wear the same suit every day. And so we better get good at figuring out how we can be our most confident self. And what I love in Excel is we are shifting the conversation to say, if you're someone who wants to wear a blazer and sneakers, go do that. But let's figure out how to make it a presentation that inspires confidence.
Mhm.
And that's just what you do. And so, it's not one thing that we can point to that leads to a vulnerability, but at Excel, we really try to look at so many aspects of leadership, not just sort of the typical ones that you were trained and you have X, Y, and Z on your resume, but what are the interpersonal? What is the psychological sort of fortitude? What have you figured out that is an area that makes you nervous? And Excel really tries to lean into that area because you're always going to be challenged. But if it's an area that you've already challenged yourself, you're going to come out so much stronger.
I'm hearing fostering the transparency, despite what experiences may have occurred in the past,
Yes.
and using that because what we're talking about here, I think, is transparency as a strength, right?
Yes.
And using that as a strength, and I think that's a great endeavor. I think that's really important and valuable. I think as I've thought about transparency, so I have a tendency personally to be an open book kind
Mhm.
of person a lot of times, and I think it's probably worthwhile for me to just state to the those listening that transparency doesn't necessarily mean exposing every detail,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because then that can create confusion among those people that we're leading. It can create
Mhm.
panic. It can create all these sorts of things. But anyway, that was just floating around in my mind too. I thought,
Yes.
better say this outright.
Yeah, it reminds me of, leading during the pandemic. I mean, there was an
Mhm.
impossible situation,
Yeah,
and I think school leaders particularly had to be learning on the job. They became, you know, sort of, doctors. I mean, they often had to be ahead of the science and be able to communicate a plan that would instill confidence. And, because these are tuition driving schools, so these parents who are paying a lot of money are terrified. None of us knew what was gonna happen, and particularly when I think it was determined that going back to school and being in person is so much better for kids. That was a mental leap for a lot of parents. And so leaders could not say, "Hey, we just put this plan together last night. We're hitting and hoping here." But that's actually what they had to do. And so they
mhm,
had to fake it until they made
yeah,
it. No one knew what they were doing. And I would say, even where you usually have professional sort of generosity and like snow days, "Hey, are you guys going to close?" That kind of thing.
yeah,
In this, every community was different,
mhm,
and, if you had lots of land and, you could come back a lot earlier, but if you were a city-bound school that only had so many square feet, there were standards that you couldn't
yeah,
reach, and so, parents are paying all this money. Is it just bad luck that in this situation, your kid would not get to, go? So there's all of this spinning that
yeah,
teachers had to do, leaders had to do,
mhm.
so it can be very hard, but you cannot be completely transparent about things that would make people panic.
That leads me to a question. I mean, how can we? You may not know this may be a rhetorical question, but it's something
Mm.
that we need to think about, right? But how do we find the right balance between being transparent and open and maintaining necessary discretion? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it grows over time. I think
Mhm,
that understanding culture, I think there's a term, culture eats strategy for breakfast, that,
mhm,
you know, best laid plans, but if you didn't understand how the plans would actually unfold in that community, then they're worthless. I think that you have to do your due diligence and trust your instincts, your EQ on who are people who are going to give you an honest answer on how much you can disclose. So I think that especially when a leader is coming into a new community, finding people who can be your North Star, who can be very confidential and say, oh, you're about to step in it and let me help you, walk around it. Or when you did, some people are too afraid to tell the leader that they stepped in it. So
mhm.
all of that is good feedback. And so being able to translate, maybe some hard realities into how you calibrate your transparency, I think is helpful.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
I was just thinking, I know a lot about schools,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know a lot about the military, and I've been fascinated, about your research and your book. Schools are places that we're talking about building character development and, sort of fleshing out all the perspectives. And the military, what I don't know about it is how much of that transparency can you share when you're under pressure and, there is this chain of command?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A lot of folks don't have a good understanding of how the military works, and
Yeah.
so you're not alone. The
Yeah.
large majority, I think it's less than 2% of the population, uh, is in the military. Actually, active duty, military is less than 1% at this point, and I think it's somewhere around 12% of people have military experience in our, society, so that's not uncommon. I think that what happens is, and I'll get to your question, I'm just,
Oh,
sort of
sure.
doing a little preamble here, but what happens is most people's understanding, quote unquote, of the military is based on Hollywood depictions
Hmm.
of of singular moments of action, right? Like
Okay.
there you're not going to sit around and watch a movie that takes a year of relationship development to get to the moment when somebody says jump on the grenade or whatever, right? Like that'd be a really long movie.
Yeah.
You're just going to see the scene where the guy jumps on the grenade or
Hmm.
whatever it may be, right? Nobody's going to tell you to jump on the grenade. That's just a reflex. But that to say that there is Hollywoodification,
Hmm.
if you will, of what it means to be in the military. And command and control is a part of military, no doubt, but so much more of it, at least when it's done right, okay, it is about character. It's about being honest with people and having integrity and honor and courage and all those great virtues that we talk about. It's about those things, first,
Yeah.
fundamentally as a bedrock, and then you build on that competence and caring about it, folks, and then the communication that's required to be able to get the message across and the mission and the plan and do all the things that you need to do. So it's definitely absolutely a big part of it. Now to the question of transparency, sometimes there's transparency, psychological or emotional transparency, which is some of what we're talking about today.
Hmm.
But then there's also informational
Hmm.
transparency,
Yes.
which which is really something that you got to pay a lot of attention to in the military because we're talking about national security and threats from people whose desire is to undo us,
Hmm.
if we don't do that first, undo ourselves. But so there's some guard against that kind of transparency, right? It's only
Yes.
those who need to know get to know
Yes.
because it could threaten the lives of not only everybody in this unit, but potentially on a larger scale, the very livelihood of the United States of America and our Constitution. So there's limitation on transparency in that regard. Historically, the emotional side of it, people just push that down,
Hmm.
don't show that, right? But I think that the reason that people do jump on the grenade or they do storm the fort or whatever they're doing is because of relationships
Yep.
and belief in the people that are leading them. And to do that, they have to believe that you're a person of character and that you're worthy of being followed and that the mission is worth dying over.
Yeah.
And so I think that transparency in that regard is really important. Is somebody going to follow you if you're just sitting around, boohooing or whatever? No, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking
Yeah.
about being honest way before that to say, hey, I'm in a bad place and we all have rough goes and those sorts of things, as opposed to, you know, I'm infallible, and that sort of thing.
I appreciate that. I'm seeing the parallel to, in schools, the pandemic that, it takes a long time, as you're saying, with generals and other military leaders to build that trust that the person believes in you long before you're given sort of a scary order to execute. And similar to schools, the trust was built in, the heads of schools so that when they said, this is what we need you to do, and we can't share all of our reasons for it, you just have to trust because you have built up that relationship. And so it feels like when the stakes are high, in terms of there's like little room for error, people could get hurt.
Mhm.
That's a situation that is a very low transparency situation. But as you point out, that that's on the heels of a much longer process that the leader has built trust
Yeah.
through, transparency and direction. So
Yeah.
thank you. That really rings true.
Well, this ties back, I think, exactly to what we were talking about just before you asked the question,
Hmm.
and that is we have to know our people, right?
Yes.
Like we need to, we were discussing what is it that, what is a tip, if you will? How do you maintain discretion versus transparency? It's you got to know your audience. You have to have the relationships, which is what you were just talking about, and I was talking about. You have to know your people. You have to have a good relationship with them to know I can be transparent with this person versus this person's a weasel,
Hmm.
or whatever it is. I,
Yes.
I can't. They're. I mean, because let's be honest, there are people out there who are always looking for somebody else's weakness so they can capitalize that on it either now or later. So
Yes.
you'd really have to know what we would say your battle space. You got to understand what you're dealing with. But I think that's where having a good team and knowing your people comes in. So yeah, I think that all fits together really nicely. Any practical tips? And you hit on a few a little bit earlier, but practical tips on how folks can really maintain and foster transparency in their organizations.
It's sort of an overarching theme, I think, is staying
Mm.
curious
Mm.
about who you're engaged with. Um, there's nothing more flattering than being asked questions about yourself. And so I think that communicates an integrity, it communicates I care. And so staying curious and modeling, making mistakes and not being afraid to be funny, incorporating humor. I think sometimes people can just get so focused on work and they get very serious. They may not even realize sort of their resting face.
That's
um,
me.
that like at Excel, we spend the first, I can't even say I limit the time always, checking in with people.
Mhm.
And I want to know everyone needs to contribute. And sometimes it's a funny sort of low hanging fruit kind of question. But that's what builds our community over the long term, especially when we live all over the United States.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's good. Certainly, and I attribute it to a significant degree to just the seriousness of my job, but
Yes.
I tend to be, in the professional setting, I tend to be more stoic, I think, than certainly I am in other settings, I hope at least. Uh, Thanks for sharing that. I have 5, scientifically sort of backed practices for building transparency as a leader, and so the first is be clear about decision-making processes, explain not just what the decisions are, but why we're making them. People need to know that, so that they can buy in, really. The second one is encourage two-way communication. Make it easy for those that we're leading to ask questions and give them feedback on things as well as have them feedback to us. The third is own our mistakes, which you hit on, and model accountability. So show that, transparency applies at every level, including leadership, maybe especially at leadership levels. Number 4 is set expectations and follow through. Be upfront about goals and challenges, changes, and then deliver on the promises. And then number 5, share information proactively. Don't wait for somebody else to ask because then it looks like you're hiding something. Communicate it early and often. So those are the 5 scientifically backed ones from the literature, at least.
They sound great. Something just occurs to me that I'm trying to improve more in my leadership is to take my time. I think
Mm,
very often when people are coming, coaching situations, asking for advice, um, I want to provide a solution. I think just reminding myself to take a beat, that nothing is usually requiring something in the second, and that communicates to the person, I'm going to think about this. I care about this. I'm not just going to sort of give you my knee-jerk reaction. Um, that I think that also builds trust, and transparency in teams. But it's certainly something I'm working on, but I'm usually rolling late to things, coming in hot. And so I'm really trying to slow things down and take a beat.
yeah. Well, it's been a great discussion from my perspective. Hopefully, you've enjoyed it too.
Yes, I've loved it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the Science of Leadership today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.